I never thought I would come home from a weekend trip to find a padlock on my own ranch gate with a sign taped to it advertising premium ranch access $50 per vehicle. But there I was, staring at the audacity of what the Ridgewood Hills HOA had done while I was visiting my brother in Colorado. My name is Keith Kavanaugh, and I own a 200-acre working cattle ranch in rural Montana, just outside of Billings. Well, I say just outside, but it's actually a solid 40-minute drive from the city limits. My property has been in my family since 1947, passed down from my grandfather to my father, and then to me when Dad died 5 years ago. The land is beautiful. Rugged Montana terrain with rolling hills, a creek running through the western portion, and enough grazing land to support my herd of about 70 cattle. I also lease out portions to a local farmer for hay production. It is not just my home. It is my livelihood. The trouble started about 2 years ago when a developer bought the adjacent property and built something called Ridgewood Hills, a gated community of McMansions that promised rustic mountain living with modern amenities. The houses sold fast to wealthy families from Seattle, San Francisco, and even some from back east who wanted a Montana address without actually living the Montana lifestyle. They built their homes with 3-car garages, swimming pools, and professionally landscaped yards that needed constant watering in our semi-arid climate. The whole thing felt wrong to me from the start, but I figured live and let live. They had their land, I had mine. The problems began small. First, it was complaints about the smell from my cattle. One woman, who I would later learn was named Brenda Bancroft, actually called the county to report me for creating a health hazard with my livestock. The county inspector came out, took one look around, confirmed I was well within all regulations for a working ranch, and left. Then came complaints about the noise. Apparently, roosters crowing at dawn was disturbing the peaceful suburban atmosphere these people had paid premium prices to enjoy. Never mind that this was rural Montana and had been ranch land for generations before their development existed. But I tried to be neighborly. When one of their kids' soccer balls ended up on my property, I personally returned it. When they needed access to repair a water line that ran along the edge of both properties, I gave permission without hesitation. I even invited some of them to a community barbecue I hosted, though only 2 families showed up, and they left early. The HOA formally contacted me about 6 months ago. I received a certified letter from Brenda Bancroft, who identified herself as the president of the Ridgewood Hills Homeowners Association. The letter informed me that my property was negatively impacting property values in their community and requested that I attend their next board meeting to discuss solutions. I ignored it. I was not part of their HOA. My property predated their development by decades, and I had no intention of letting them dictate what I could do on my own land. More letters followed. They wanted me to install aesthetic screening along the property line. They wanted me to limit my cattle to certain areas that would not be visible from their homes. They wanted me to pave my driveway because the dust from my gravel road was creating air quality issues. Each letter was more absurd than the last, and I continued to ignore them all. My property lawyer, an old friend named Tom Henderson, assured me they had no legal standing to make any demands of me whatsoever. Then I went to visit my brother Jake in Denver for a long weekend. I left on a Thursday morning in early April and planned to return Sunday evening. I had hired a local kid named Marcus to come by twice a day to feed the cattle and check on things. Everything was fine when I left. When I pulled up to my gate Sunday evening, the first thing I saw was that padlock. It was a heavy-duty industrial lock securing a thick chain that had been wrapped through the bars of my gate. Below it, someone had zip-tied a laminated sign that read, "Private Ranch Tours, Ridgewood Hills Community. Exclusive $50 per vehicle. Proceeds benefit community improvements." There was a phone number to call for scheduling. I sat in my truck for a full minute, trying to process what I was seeing. Then the anger hit. I got out, examined the lock more closely, and tried calling the number on the sign. It went to voicemail. The message was Brenda Bancroft's voice. "You have reached the Ridgewood Hills HOA Activities Coordinator. If you are calling about ranch access passes, please leave your name, number, and preferred tour date. Passes are $50 per vehicle and grant access to the historic Kavanaugh Ranch for scenic drives and wildlife viewing. Thank you. I felt my blood pressure spike. They had locked me out of my own property and were selling access to it like some kind of tourist attraction. I called Marcus immediately. "Mr. Kavanaugh, I'm so sorry," Marcus said when he answered. He sounded genuinely distressed. "They showed up Friday afternoon with the lock and chain. I told them this was your property and they could not do this. But that Brenda woman said they had a legal right because your ranch was in violation of community standards. She had these papers that looked official, and I did not know what to do. I called the sheriff, but by the time a deputy got here, they had already put up the lock and left." "Did the deputy do anything?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "He took a report, but he said it was a civil matter, and you would need to handle it with a lawyer. He did not make them remove the lock. Mr. Kavanaugh, I am really sorry. I did not know what else to do. I have been climbing over the fence to get in and feed the cattle. I told Marcus it was not his fault and thanked him for taking care of the animals. Then I called Tom Henderson, even though it was Sunday evening. Tom had been my father's lawyer and had handled all the property transfers when Dad passed. He knew every inch of the legal history of my ranch. "Keith, get some photos of everything," Tom said after I explained the situation. "The lock, the sign, all of it. Do not cut the lock off yourself. I know you want to, but that could complicate things. I will file for an emergency hearing first thing Monday morning. This is trespassing, property interference, and potentially a few other charges. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" I told him I could get a hotel room in Billings. Before I left, I took dozens of photos from every angle. While I was photographing the sign, a silver Mercedes SUV pulled up. A man in his 50s with expensive sunglasses rolled down his window. Are you here for the ranch tour?" he asked cheerfully. I did not think they ran them this late, but I would love to book one for next weekend. My wife and I just moved here from San Jose, and we have been wanting to see some authentic Montana ranch land. "This is my ranch," I said flatly, "and there are no tours. That sign is fraudulent." His expression changed from cheerful to confused to annoyed in rapid succession. "Well, the HOA sent out an email blast about it. They said it was a community benefit, a chance to experience rural Montana life. I already told my wife we would go." "The HOA does not own this property, has no right to be on this property, and certainly has no right to sell access to it," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger. "I suggest you ask for a refund if you already paid." He drove off without another word, and I could see him on his phone as he pulled away. Good. Maybe if enough of their residents realized what Brenda and her board were doing, there would be internal pressure on them too. I spent Sunday night at a Holiday Inn near the airport, barely sleeping. By the time Tom's office opened Monday morning, I was parked outside waiting. We spent 2 hours going over everything. Tom pulled out the original land deed from 1947, all the subsequent transfer documents, property surveys, and tax records. Everything clearly showed that my property was completely independent of Ridgewood Hills, predated it by 67 years, and had no legal connection to their HOA whatsoever. "This is actually insane," Tom said, shaking his head as he reviewed everything. "I have seen HOAs overreach before, but this is criminal. They have physically blocked your access to your property and are attempting to profit from it. We are filing for an emergency restraining order and injunction this morning. I'm also going to recommend you file a police report for theft and fraud." We went to the Yellowstone County Courthouse first. Tom filed the emergency motion, and we got lucky. Judge Patricia Morrison agreed to hear us that afternoon at 3 o'clock. Then we went to the sheriff's office where I filed a formal report. The deputy who took my statement looked increasingly shocked as I explained the situation. "So they locked you out of your own ranch and are charging people to go on it?" he repeated, as if needing to confirm he had heard correctly. "That is exactly what happened," I confirmed. "I have photos, voicemail evidence, and a witness who saw them install the lock." He took down all the information and said a detective would be in touch. It was not the immediate action I had hoped for, but at least it was on record. At 3 o'clock, Tom and I stood before Judge Morrison. The HOA had been given notice of the emergency hearing, but had not sent legal representation. Instead, Brenda Bancroft showed up with 2 other board members, both women around her age. Brenda wore a cream-colored pantsuit and had the kind of severely styled blonde hair that required weekly salon visits. She carried a leather portfolio and had the confidence of someone who genuinely believed she was in the right. Judge Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had been on the bench for over 20 years, looked distinctly unimpressed. "Ms. Bancroft, you are here representing the Ridgewood Hills HOA board," the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda said, standing. "And I want to assure the court that everything we have done is within our rights as established by our community covenants. And, Ms. Bancroft, does the Ridgewood Hills HOA have any legal claim to the property owned by Keith Kavanaugh?" Judge Morrison interrupted. Brenda hesitated. "Not in the traditional sense, Your Honor, but his property directly impacts our community, and our covenants give us the authority to address properties that negatively affect our residents' quality of life and property values." "That's not what I asked," the judge said sharply. "Do you have any legal claim, ownership interest, or easement rights to Mr. Kavanaugh's property?" "No, Your Honor, but then on what basis did you place a lock on his gate and prevent him from accessing his property?" Brenda pulled papers from her portfolio. "We have documented numerous violations of community standards originating from his property. Odors from livestock, excessive noise, dust from unpaved roads, and visual blight. Our community has the right to protect our property values. When Mr. Kavanaugh refused to address these issues, we had no choice but to take action. The access passes were simply a way to offset the costs of addressing the problems his ranch creates for our community." I watched the judge's expression grow colder with every word Brenda spoke. Tom squeezed my arm gently, a signal to stay calm and let this play out. "Ms. Bancroft, let me be extremely clear," Judge Morrison said, her voice like ice. "You do not have the authority to take action on property you do not own. You do not have the right to physically prevent a property owner from accessing his own land. And you certainly do not have the right to sell access to property that is not yours. What you have described is not community enforcement. It is theft, trespassing, and fraud." Brenda's face flushed red. "Your Honor, with respect, I think you are misunderstanding the scope of HOA authority under Montana law. We have a responsibility to our residents. I understand Montana property law perfectly well, Ms. Bancroft. I have been practicing it longer than you have been alive. Mr. Henderson, what is your client seeking?" Tom stood. "Your Honor, we request an immediate injunction ordering the HOA to remove the lock and chain from Mr. Kavanaugh's gate, to cease all attempts to control or profit from his property, and to cease all contact with him except through legal counsel. We are also asking for compensatory damages for the lost access to his property and the cost of finding alternative lodging this weekend. Additionally, we will be filing a separate civil suit for punitive damages, emotional distress, and legal fees." "Granted," Judge Morrison said immediately. "The injunction is effective immediately. Ms. Bancroft, you and your board have until 6 o'clock this evening to remove that lock and any signage related to your illegal scheme. If it is not removed by then, Mr. Kavanaugh is authorized to remove it himself by any means necessary, and I will hold you in contempt of court. Furthermore, if I hear any reports of you or your board members setting foot on Mr. Kavanaugh's property or contacting him except through his attorney, I will issue arrest warrants. Do you understand?" Brenda looked like she had been slapped. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. Our community—" "Do you understand?" the judge repeated, her voice sharp. "Yes," Brenda said tightly. As we left the courtroom, I could hear Brenda on her phone, her voice shrill with indignation. "I do not care what the judge said. Call Gerald immediately. We need to appeal this. This is a disaster." Tom and I went to a diner for coffee afterward. "That went better than I expected," he said, allowing himself a small smile. "Morrison is tough but fair. She saw right through their nonsense." "What happens now?" I asked. "We wait until 6 o'clock to see if they comply. My guess is they will. Even Brenda Bancroft is not stupid enough to defy a direct court order from Judge Morrison. Then, we move forward with the civil suit. Based on what happened today, I think we have a very strong case. I am going to seek full legal fees, compensatory damages for your inability to access your property and conduct business, and punitive damages to send a message that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated." At 5:45 that evening, I drove back out to my ranch. The lock and chain were gone, lying in a heap beside the road along with the sign, which had been torn in half. I opened my gate, drove through, and finally felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. I was home. Over the next few days, I learned more about what had happened while I was gone. Marcus told me that on the Saturday after the lock went up, at least 6 vehicles had shown up wanting their ranch tours. Brenda had apparently accompanied one group herself, driving them through my property in a golf cart she had somehow gotten through a side fence line that bordered HOA common space. They had driven around for about 30 minutes, and Brenda had given them a completely fabricated history of the ranch, claiming it was established in 1947 as a community resource, and that my family had always intended it to be shared with neighbors. She told them you were just a caretaker who had forgotten the property's true purpose, Marcus said, still sounding amazed by the audacity. She said the HOA was reclaiming it for community use as was originally intended. It was all complete lies, Mr. Kavanaugh. I thanked Marcus for his help and gave him a substantial bonus for dealing with such an insane situation. Then, I spent several hours checking my entire property line. I found where they had cut through the fence between my western pasture and the HOA's common area, which explained how Brenda had gotten the golf cart onto my land. I repaired it immediately and added a chain-link barrier for good measure. Tom filed the civil lawsuit on Thursday. We were suing the Ridgewood Hills HOA, Brenda Bancroft personally, and the 2 other board members who had accompanied her to court, a woman named Patricia Summers and another named Linda Whitmore. The suit detailed everything: the lock on the gate, the fraudulent sale of access passes, the trespassing onto my property to conduct tours, the damage to my fence, the harassment through letters, and the emotional distress of being locked out of my own home. We asked for $250,000 in damages. The response from the HOA was immediate and predictable. They hired a lawyer, a slick guy from Billings named Richard Crane, who specialized in real estate litigation. Crane sent Tom a letter claiming that his clients had acted in good faith based on their interpretation of their HOA authority, that there was no criminal intent, and that any damages were vastly overstated. He offered to settle for $5,000. "Tell him to go to hell," I said when Tom called to discuss the settlement offer. "I was hoping you would say that," Tom replied. The case moved surprisingly quickly. Judge Morrison was assigned to the civil case as well, which was a stroke of luck. She set a trial date for late June, just 2 months away. In the meantime, Tom filed discovery requests demanding all HOA communications, financial records, board meeting minutes, and any documentation related to their decision to lock my gate and sell access passes. What those documents revealed was even more disturbing than I had imagined. The board meeting minutes from early March showed that Brenda had proposed the Ranch Access Initiative as a way to raise funds for HOA projects. According to the minutes, she had described my ranch as underutilized land that could benefit the community, and claimed that because my property impacted their views and quality of life, they had an equitable right to assert some control over it. Several board members had questioned the legality of this plan. One member, a man named Doug Peterson, had explicitly said, "I do not think we can legally do this. It is not our property." Brenda's response, documented in the minutes, was that they could establish precedent through action, and that by the time any legal challenges were resolved, they would have already raised substantial funds and forced a negotiation with me. In other words, she knew exactly what she was doing was illegal, but she did it anyway, assuming she could either get away with it or force me into some kind of settlement after the fact. The financial records showed they had collected $900 in access pass fees before I returned from Colorado. 18 vehicles had paid for tours. Brenda had deposited the money into the HOA's operating account and had already spent $300 of it on new landscaping for the development's entrance. Tom was delighted with these discoveries. "This is evidence of willful, knowing fraud," he said. "They documented their own illegal scheme. This is going to trial, and we are going to win big." As the trial date approached, things got stranger. Residents from Ridgewood Hills started reaching out to me. Some apologized for what the HOA had done. Others admitted they had been on the unauthorized tours and offered to pay me directly for the trespass. A few asked if I would consider offering legitimate tours because they had genuinely enjoyed seeing the ranch. One woman, Sarah Newell, came to my door personally. She was younger than Brenda, probably in her late 30s, and seemed genuinely embarrassed. "Mr. Kavanaugh, I am so sorry for what happened," she said. "My husband and I moved here from Portland, and we had no idea the HOA was like this. We bought one of those access passes because we thought it was legitimate. When we found out what they had done, we were horrified. I resigned from the HOA Welcome Committee. A lot of residents are really angry at Brenda and the board. I appreciated her apology, and we ended up having a good conversation. Sarah told me there was a growing movement within Ridgewood Hills to recall the entire board and reform the HOA's governance structure. Apparently, this was not the first time Brenda had overstepped, just the most egregious example. She had previously tried to fine a resident for painting their front door the wrong color, had attempted to ban children from playing in common areas during certain hours, and had allegedly used HOA funds to pay for her personal attendance at a luxury resort conference in Arizona that had almost no educational value. "We moved here because we love Montana and wanted to be part of a real community," Sarah said, "but Brenda runs that HOA like her personal fiefdom. She does not understand that rules exist for everyone, including her. A lot of us are really hoping you win your lawsuit. She needs to learn she cannot just do whatever she wants." The recall effort gained momentum quickly. Within 2 weeks, a petition had gathered enough signatures to trigger a special election. The vote was scheduled for mid-June, just before our trial date. I stayed out of it, but Tom advised me that the internal conflict could work in our favor at trial, demonstrating that even the HOA's own members recognized the board's actions were wrong. Meanwhile, the detective from the sheriff's office finally got back to me. Detective Maria Gonzalez called to say they had completed their investigation and were forwarding the case to the county attorney's office with a recommendation for criminal charges. "This is pretty cut and dried," Detective Gonzalez said. "What they did meets the legal definition of theft, fraud, and criminal trespass. The fact that they documented it so thoroughly actually makes our job easier. The county attorney will make the final call on charges, but I would be surprised if they did not prosecute." That news felt like vindication. This was not just a civil dispute. What Brenda and the board had done was criminal, and the legal system was recognizing that. The special HOA election happened on June 14th. Brenda Bancroft, Patricia Summers, and Linda Whitmore were all voted out by overwhelming margins. The new board president was a retired attorney named Michael Chen, who immediately reached out to Tom with an offer to settle. "Mr. Kavanaugh, on behalf of the new board, I want to apologize for what happened," Michael said when we met at Tom's office. "What the previous board did was indefensible. We would like to settle this matter fairly and make things right. We are prepared to offer full reimbursement of your legal fees to date, a formal written apology from the HOA, and $50,000 in damages." It was a better offer than the previous $5,000, but it still was not enough. "I appreciate the apology," I said. "But what happened here was not just an administrative error or a misunderstanding. They locked me out of my property, sold access to my land, trespassed repeatedly, and caused me substantial harm and stress. $50,000 does not adequately reflect the seriousness of what they did." Michael nodded. "I understand. What would you consider fair?" Tom and I had discussed this. $150,000 full legal fees, a formal written apology published in the community newsletter and posted on the HOA website, and a binding agreement that the HOA will make no further attempts to control, influence, or interfere with Mr. Kavanaugh's property in any way. Additionally, we want the HOA to implement mandatory training for all board members on property rights and legal boundaries of HOA authority. Michael did not hesitate. "Done. I will bring this to our board meeting tonight. But I am confident they will approve it. We are grateful you are willing to settle. We were genuinely worried about what a trial verdict might look like, especially with Judge Morrison presiding." The settlement was formalized within a week. I received a check for $150,000 plus $80,000 for legal fees. The formal apology was published and posted exactly as requested. It read, "The Ridgewood Hills Homeowners Association Board of Directors formally apologizes to Mr. Keith Kavanaugh for the illegal and unethical actions taken by the previous board in March and April of this year. The previous board wrongfully placed a lock on Mr. Kavanaugh's private property, fraudulently sold access passes to his ranch, and trespassed on his land. These actions were completely unauthorized, illegal, and contrary to the values our community should represent. We deeply regret the harm caused to Mr. Kavanaugh and commit to ensuring such overreach never happens again. We have implemented new governance procedures, board training requirements, and oversight mechanisms to prevent future violations of property rights and legal boundaries. The county attorney's office filed criminal charges against Brenda Bancroft 3 days after the settlement was finalized. She was charged with theft by deception, criminal trespass, and fraud. Patricia Summers and Linda Whitmore were charged as accomplices. Richard Crane, their civil attorney, was apparently not interested in handling criminal defense because they hired a different lawyer, someone named James Mitchell from Helena. The criminal case moved more slowly than the civil matter, but it followed a predictable path. Brenda initially pleaded not guilty, apparently still convinced she had done nothing wrong. But when the prosecutor laid out the evidence, including the board meeting minutes where she acknowledged the questionable legality of her plan, Mitchell advised her to take a plea deal. In September, Brenda pleaded guilty to theft and fraud. The trespass charge was dropped as part of the plea agreement. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution of $900, the full amount collected from the fraudulent access passes. The judge also banned her from serving on any HOA board for 5 years. Patricia Summers and Linda Whitmore took similar plea deals, receiving lighter sentences since they had followed Brenda's lead rather than initiated the scheme themselves. They each got 1 year of probation and 100 hours of community service. I attended Brenda's sentencing hearing. I wanted to see this through to the end. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up. Your Honor, what Ms. Bancroft and her board did was not just illegal. It was a violation of the most basic principle of property rights. My family has owned and worked that ranch for 3 generations. My grandfather built that gate in 1952. For someone to come along and decide they could lock me out of my own home, my own livelihood, because they did not like the way it looked or smelled, shows a level of entitlement and disregard for others that is genuinely shocking. I hope this sentence sends a message that HOAs, regardless of their perceived authority, must operate within the law and respect the property rights of others. Thank you. Brenda did not look at me during my statement. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and gave a brief, stiff apology that sounded more like something her lawyer had written than genuine remorse. I apologize for my actions and any harm they caused. I believed I was acting in the best interests of my community, but I recognize now that I overstepped legal boundaries. I accept responsibility and the court's judgment. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure. The nightmare that had started with finding that lock on my gate was finally over. The legal system had worked. Justice had been served, both civilly and criminally. Life gradually returned to normal after that. The new Ridgewood Hills Board proved to be reasonable neighbors. They stopped trying to control what happened on my property and focused on managing their own community. Michael Chen even came by a few months later to discuss creating a community garden on HOA land, asking if I had any advice about dealing with Montana's soil conditions. We had a good conversation, and I gave him some tips about composting and soil amendments. Sarah Newell and I became friendly as well. She and her husband brought their kids by the ranch a few times, and I let them help feed the cattle and see how a working ranch operates. It turned out there were quite a few families in Ridgewood Hills who were genuinely interested in rural life and respectful of the fact that ranching was real work, not just a picturesque backdrop for their mountain views. I used part of the settlement money to make some improvements to the ranch. I installed a new irrigation system for the hayfields, replaced some aging equipment, and finally fixed the roof on my barn that had been leaking for 2 years. I also set aside a good portion for property taxes and future legal fees, just in case. Once you have been through something like this, you learn to be prepared. The following spring, I got a call from a reporter at the Billings Gazette who wanted to do a story about the case. Apparently, it had caught the attention of property rights advocates across Montana and even nationally among people concerned about HOA overreach. I agreed to an interview, and the resulting article was published in May, almost exactly a year after the incident. The article detailed everything that had happened and included quotes from Tom about the broader implications for property rights and HOA governance. It also included Michael Chen discussing the reforms Ridgewood Hills had implemented. The story got picked up by several national outlets, and I ended up doing a few radio interviews with property rights organizations. One of those interviews connected me with a guy named Robert Kent, who ran a nonprofit focused on HOA reform legislation. Robert told me that cases like mine were becoming more common as HOAs gained power and sometimes overstepped legal boundaries. He asked if I would be willing to testify if Montana ever considered legislation to clarify the limits of HOA authority. I agreed. If my experience could help prevent someone else from being locked out of their own property, it would be worth it. In July, about 14 months after the original incident, I was out checking fence lines when I saw someone standing near my front gate. It was Brenda Bancroft. She was not on my property, just standing on the public road looking toward my house. I drove my truck down to see what she wanted, ready to call the police if she set one foot on my land. "Mr. Kavanaugh," she said when I got close. She looked different than she had in court. Older, tired, less polished. "I know I am not supposed to contact you and I will leave right away. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not the court-ordered apology my lawyer wrote. What I did was wrong. I convinced myself I was protecting my community, but the truth is I just wanted control. I did not like that there was something I could not regulate or manage. I am in therapy now, working on understanding why I did what I did. I do not expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I genuinely regret what I put you through." I looked at her for a long moment. She seemed sincere, but the damage she had caused was real. Finding that lock on my gate had been one of the most violating experiences of my life. She had stolen my peace of mind and sense of security in my own home. "I appreciate you saying that," I finally said. "I hope you have learned from this and that you do not hurt anyone else the way you hurt me. But I think it is best if we do not have any further contact." She nodded. "I understand. Thank you for hearing me out." She walked back to her car, a modest sedan that was a far cry from the luxury SUV I remembered her driving before, and left. I stood there for a while after she drove away, processing the encounter. Part of me wanted to hold on to anger, but another part recognized that she had at least acknowledged what she had done and seemed to be trying to change. Whether that was genuine or just part of her legal rehabilitation, I would never know, but I decided to let it go. Holding on to rage would only hurt me, not her. That fall, I hired a new ranch hand, a younger guy named Tyler who had grown up on a ranch outside of Great Falls and was looking for steady work. With his help, I was able to expand operations a bit, increasing my herd size and taking on more hay production. The settlement money had given me some financial breathing room to invest in the ranch's future, and business was good. The Ridgewood Hills community settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new board operated transparently and within proper legal boundaries. They focused on maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and addressing legitimate concerns from residents. They did not try to control what happened beyond their property lines, and our relationship remained cordial and respectful. 2 years after the incident, Montana did pass legislation clarifying HOA authority and establishing clearer penalties for overreach. The law explicitly stated that HOAs had no authority over properties not bound by their covenants and established significant penalties for HOAs that attempted to interfere with non-member properties. I testified at a legislative hearing, sharing my story and advocating for the bill. It passed with strong bipartisan support, and the governor signed it in April. Robert Kent called to congratulate me after the bill passed. "You know, your case was the catalyst for this," he said. "It demonstrated so clearly how badly things can go wrong when an HOA forgets the limits of its authority. This law is going to protect a lot of property owners." That felt good. Something positive had come from the nightmare. Today, life on the ranch is peaceful. The cattle are healthy, the hay crop is strong, and I have good working relationships with my neighbors, including the folks at Ridgewood Hills. I still have the old padlock and chain that they put on my gate. I keep it in my office as a reminder of what I went through and how important it is to stand up for your rights. It also reminds me that the legal system, while sometimes slow, does work when you have good people like Tom and Judge Morrison who understand justice. I never thought I would have to fight for access to my own land, but I'm glad I did. I'm glad I did not back down or accept their first low settlement offer. I'm glad the criminal justice system held Brenda accountable, and I'm glad that my experience led to real change in Montana law that will protect other property owners. The ranch my grandfather established in 1947 is still here, still working, still producing. It has survived drought, harsh winters, economic downturns, and even an HOA trying to steal it. That resilience is what ranching is about. You face challenges, you adapt, and you keep going. The land endures, and so do the people who love it. Looking back, I realized that everything that happened taught me important lessons. I learned that property rights are only as strong as your willingness to defend them. I learned that documentation is crucial when facing any kind of legal challenge. I learned that the legal system, for all its flaws, can deliver justice when you have a good attorney and a fair judge. And I learned that communities work best when everyone respects boundaries and operates with integrity. My ranch is my home, my livelihood, and my legacy. No HOA, no matter how entitled or overreaching, was ever going to take that away from me. I showed them the deed, I took them to court, and I won. That is the Montana way. You stand your ground, you fight for what is right, and you do not let anyone push you around on your own land. The gate at the entrance to my property swings freely now, secured only by the latch I choose to use. No more padlocks that do not belong there. No more signs selling access to land that is not for sale. Just a working ranch in Montana operated by someone who knows his rights and is not afraid to defend them. That is how it should be, and that is how it will stay.